Another week, another set of gaming news. This week we haven't seen as much news as we did last week, but there are some big things to go into it. If you like this video, like, comment and subscribe as I go through the week of gaming to go through some of the biggest stories and give you a little bit of insight into them. I'm your host Damien Richards and welcome to Stay Tuned on Gaming, episode 3. So let's get some of these other things out of the way first. The Last of Us TV show. Showed a trailer of last week, it was pretty cool. Yes, it'll premiere on 16th January, of course, on HBO in 2023. There was some big studio news this week as Hitman Go studio Omnia has been shut down. This is just after they were bought by the Embracer Group. They were known for making those mobile Go series games from all the different EDS Montreal and Crystal Dynamic games. They're going to be shut down. And I think this is going to basically be happening because a report came out that said EDS Montreal was working on a new Deus Ex game that seems to be very early in development. But they also have a new IP and they also seem to be working with Microsoft on a couple of Xbox games. So yeah, this means that EDS Montreal is working on things. We've been told by Embracer Group that they do plan to make a lot of Tomb Raider and a lot of Deus Ex games. So it's not surprising that they're doing it, you know. And again, EDS Montreal wanted to make a Deus Ex game, but that got cancelled. And then they got put on Tomb Raider, and then they were doing Guardians of the Galaxy, which was actually a pretty good game, but no one played it. That was the only issue. So while there wasn't a lot of interesting news, there was some big PlayStation Sony news as they dropped financial reports this week. So let's go over some of the very cool details that happened inside this financial report. Now, probably the biggest news you saw was that Sony lost 2 million PlayStation Plus subscribers, and that was the big news. Everyone was posting out there. People were saying Game Pass won, all these various stuff, but there's a lot more context to be placed in here. So let's go through some of the figures about what they've presented. Now, yes, Sony did lose 2 million PlayStation Plus subscribers, but there's a lot there. Yes, they went from 47.3 million to 45.4 million in this quarter, but that was influenced due to a great decline in the PlayStation 4 users than PS5 users. Yes, they saw a decrease by 4%, but PlayStation 5 users have an extremely high level to PS Plus. So yeah, this is basically what I wanted to talk about here, was that while PlayStation Plus did lose some viewers, it was mainly on the PS4, which makes sense because the PlayStation 4 has the biggest install base, and so that's where most of the market of Sony PlayStation will be affected. There's not a lot of PS5s. I believe to date, there's at least 29 PS5s, 29 million PS5s they've released by September. And Sony is planning to do a lot more. I'll break that down a little bit else. But it also makes sense that PlayStation Plus would be making this big loss because they did change it a lot. They completely went ahead, they changed PS5, they made all the tier systems, and you'll either get people with that or lose people with that. And they lost some people on PS4, but it also could mean that people are just waiting to transition to the PS5, and that Sony now has a big issue of them trying to ship more consoles. The PS5 market is also very small, but is very demanding and people really want the system. So if Sony gets more people to buy the PS5, I could see them making that increase. The decline is also not a big issue because, like I said, they did revamp PlayStation Plus, which they were probably going to lose money from in any case, because whenever you do a revamp or a rebrand like this, you never make money in the beginning. You always lose somewhere. And I don't even think Sony is planning on making a profit with PlayStation Plus anytime soon, until maybe next year or the year after that, depending on how they work out, you know, PlayStation Plus and all the different tiers and systems. The biggest issue I have with PlayStation Plus at the moment is that the tier system just doesn't work, right? You've got the bottom tier, which allows you to get PlayStation Plus, normal, cheapest version. You've got the middle tier, which allows you to get PlayStation Plus and the games catalog. And then you got the last tier, which offers you, you know, trials and PlayStation Plus, the games catalog, and of course the classic catalog. And that's where most of the issue I have coming with that classic games catalog. Sony hasn't been able to sell their classics game catalog or any of the tiers. That's the biggest issue. There's something that Microsoft cannot compete with when it comes to Nintendo and PlayStation, and that's history. There is so much history between both of those two companies. It's something that Xbox just doesn't have. And if Sony was able to get more people in to the classics game catalog, I think they would actually see an increase in not only price, but subscribers. And they've even done some like devious stuff where they put like a series of games on the games catalog and then they put the others in the classics game catalog. So it's quite sad to see that, because they're trying to get people to buy into the number one tier, the biggest tier. That is the number one tier. I mean, they've also announced that they'll be bringing a lot of Ratchet and Clank games coming to both the games catalog and the classic tier. So again, that's games that people would love to play. I mean, there's so much history with PlayStation and all its titles. Like, there's so many titles that people haven't seen in like decades from Sony that people would love to play. The PS3 is home to some crazy games, and the PS2, the amount of games on there is just insane. And then there's still PS1 games, the PSP, the PS Vita. That amount of history is something that Sony should tap into. Now again, this new version of PlayStation Plus is very much in its infancy, and Sony has to get all of this right, because if they don't, I don't see them being able to compete with Game Pass. And I don't think they need to compete with Game Pass when it comes to day one releases. I think the biggest issue is that people expect them to release these big games day one due to Game Pass. But Sony is smarter than that. They're not backed by the biggest tech company in the world. They're just trying to make the best use of their service, right? They will never offer day one games. Yes, maybe for some AA games, maybe for some indie titles. That's totally fine. But when it comes to PlayStation exclusives, forget it. God of War Ragnarok is not coming day one to PlayStation Plus. They will lose so much money if that ever happens. Now again, another way that they can really offset this cost is working with their exclusives and their third parties, getting those games out there. Their biggest deal at the moment they have is with Ubisoft, where you can get basically, I think, almost every Assassin's Creed game on PlayStation. And you can play it. You can play Valhalla right now, and that's a very big get. There's still the Far Cry series with them, and of course, South Park and various other titles that Ubisoft is bringing to PlayStation and third-party consoles is on the game's catalog, and that's a good win for them. Sure, yes, they don't have EA like Xbox has, but Ubisoft is not a bad get. Their games, while many people hate them, is still very easily to be accessed by a lot of people. That's about PlayStation Plus stuff. There was some more interesting news out here and things we have to go through. So let's go through some of the other financial reports they showed off here. So the PlayStation Network monthly active users was also on a bit of decline for this 3 months period. It was on a decline of 102 million, where last year I believe it was on 104 million, and the year earlier than that was 103. So this is the lowest for this 3-quarter period, but that's not too bad. The Sony Network services revenue, which encompasses PS Plus and ads, but not games and add-ons, did increase by 10%, which is good for them. 106 billion yen to 116 billion yen, which is again the best performance they've done, I believe, in a quarter to date since they began tracking these numbers and giving it to us, which is also pretty good. And basically that just means that the PlayStation division is making more money per subscriber per month, which makes sense because of the tier system and people buying into it. And again, they don't really count yearly subscriptions as well, which is still a plus. I think PlayStation Plus having a year subscription on all of their tiers is still a plus. And then there was some PS5 news that was brought out. They shipped 3.3 million PS5s during these 3 months, which is not a bad figure considering they are trying to get the system out. But again, it was the same time, it was about the same number I think they had last year. In total, they have shipped 5.7 million during the first quarter of the financial year, which is pretty good. Yes, this is short of Sony's target of 18 million, but that's a very achievable goal. Like if they can do it before April, they can get 18 million. They can even get more than that. Again, it'll depend on this. It'll depend on basically if they are able to get the consoles out. Sony and the network service division had revenues of 720 billion yen, and that's an up of 12% year over year. So that's not good in terms. That's pretty good in terms of the Japanese yen. Now, profit did fall significantly by 4%, but that's not really that bad. This was mainly decline was because of the gaming services. Of course, they had to invest in a lot of making a game. They had acquisitions, that development in the games, like making games. And then, of course, there was acquisitions that they got throughout the year, Bungie being one of the biggest they had. So that was obviously going to be expensive and make them lose some money. And, of course, the negative impact they've had of the exchange rate. It's just been all over the place this year. And even with the recent price of the PS5, that just offsets some of the prices. People just didn't want to spend more money for a console that they can't even get a lot of. But Sony did have overall increase by 8% to 344 billion yen, and that was because of their music and their imaging rights, which offset any decline they did have from their gaming losses, which is pretty good. There's some more interesting stuff here. Their software sales increased during the quarter at 62.5 million, which is up from the 47.2 million in the previous quarter. But it is down from last year, which was at 76.4. But again, like I said, there was a lot of switching up all the stuff with PlayStation Plus, so that makes a lot of sense. And especially since they lost people from PlayStation Plus, it makes much more sense. And also because of the games catalog, people would not be inclined to buy a lot of titles because it might come to the games catalog as well. Here's some interesting stuff. The digital software actually accounted for 63% of the quarterly game sales, which is actually up from a year earlier. So that's up within 1%, which is still pretty good, showing that video games are still selling a lot for them, digital wise. And they have a big goal this year to ship 23 million PS5s by the end of April. So that is basically all of the financial reports and really some interesting stuff, showing that yes, Sony did lose subscribers from this, but that they're building towards it and they really want to get the PS5 out there and build that market. Again, I think there's like 106 million PS4s out there compared to like, I think like less than 50 million PS5s, which is bad. But again, if they are able to transition people from PS4 to PS5 very easily and quickly, then they should see an increase in the PlayStation Plus probably by the end of next year or even in the middle of next year. And of course, they have to release some games. If they don't release anything that really sells PlayStation, they're not going to get anyone to buy into that. And that's mostly the main thing. But Sony does have something else that might help as well, and that's VR. That's right, VR. PSVR 2. Sony finally announced the release date for the PSVR 2 as well as the price. So the console will launch on February 22nd, 2023 and will be priced at $550. That is more than the PlayStation 5, even with its price increase. So yeah, that's something. Now yes, I saw a lot of people get upset about this, but I understand what Sony is doing. And there's some actually interesting figures that go with this. And that's basically the original PlayStation VR. That was launched all the way back in 2016. It was priced at $400, right? But it was never that successful. And that's mainly due to the fact of VR itself. No matter how much people hype it up, no matter how much investment is put into it, it hasn't been able to break into the mass market, into the general audience. It just hasn't been able to do that. Even the Quest, the Meta Quest, it just can't do it, right? It's mostly seen as a gimmick, and even the original PSVR, which was the most readily and cheapest VR system you could get for gaming, because you just needed a PS4, couldn't break into that market. In 2020, Sony said they sold 5 million units against the 106 units of the PS4. That's not a good number. So putting it this high of the price makes sense. Sony's not looking to mass market the PSVR. It is looking to get selective targeting and selective groups of people that want to buy it, and they're willing to lose a profit on it. Yes, the Meta is cheaper, but the PSVR 2, technically with its specs, is the more advanced of the two, so immediately it has an edge to it. So Sony is seeing that, well, we could sell a PS5 and we could maybe get some people to also buy into the VR, and those people that do buy into the VR will be getting a really good different experience. So instead of making a machine or a VR system that's mediocre, you make a really good VR system that's better than anything you can find, and just select the people to buy it. Because if you have a PS5, you'll be like, hey, maybe I should get the VR. Now the biggest issue is its games. You see, Sony says that they're going to have 20 games at launch. That sounds like a lot, right? Two issues. One, most of those titles are coming to the Quest. And two, those titles are all third party, except for like, I think 1 or 2. The first one I know of is the Horizon Heart of the Mountain game, which will be packaged with some launch PSVR. So there will be that. And I think the other one is the Dark Anthology, but everything else is coming to the meta or has been available on the meta already. So that is not really good. Look, Sony's going to have a rough time with this console. It's not going to make money. A lot of people are not going to buy into VR. A lot of people still didn't even know it was cheap. So while they are entering a very hot but small PS5 market, I think it's going to have a very rough start, and that's due to the price and the lineup, because everybody that's going to adopt this system early will be like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing ever. You have to buy this system. It's going to make it even a harder sell if the games aren't there. So Sony needs to quickly get these games out that are high quality and worth the price of admission for the console. You need people to hype up the system, and the only way to do that is with games. Once again, Sony right now is the only video game leading company that is doing anything with VR, and they're still going to be the top, I think, at the end of it. If they're able to provide experiences that are unique and different and high quality, I think the VR2 can be a success. Do I think it will sell as much as the PlayStation VR? No. They mass marketed that thing, they went everywhere with it, but the problem with the VR was that there wasn't enough games on it. The original PSVR was great. If you went to a convention and you saw it, it was great to put on, but it just never seemed worth the price. If Sony is able to increase the price of the VR2, but give you experiences that are really good and completely different than anything else, the price could be worth it. I just hope that they don't drop the ball again and release like boring titles. They have to make interesting. They have to take their bevy of studios that they have and make games that are fun and interesting. And again, VR doesn't have to be in first person. It could be third person and still work. So I hope that they're able to take these games and make them interesting and make them unique. We'll see what happens. Right? We'll have to give Sony a year. Usually you gotta give Sony a year or two before they finally figure out what they're going to do with the system. And the PSVR 2 is going to be exactly that. A figuring out of systems. And that's it. There wasn't really anything super interesting I found over the week, but the Sony stuff was super interesting and I really loved it. But let's go on to the releases. On Tuesday, 8th of November, A Little to the Left will come to PC. Then, Sonic Frontiers. That's right, the new Sonic game. People have been hyping this game up, saying it's either going to be good or bad. We'll find out. We're making its way to PC and consoles. Halo Infinite will have its winter update on the same day as well. But on Wednesday, the biggest game release for Sony this year, God of War Ragnarok, finally comes to the PlayStation 5, and it finally comes to everyone that wants to buy it. It'll be available on PS4 and PS5, with the game being reviewed very positively. I've seen a lot of people talk about its greatest game of all time. I have not looked at anything, and just be aware of spoilers. They could be anywhere, and they are everywhere. Thursday, we'll see Dying Light 2 Bloody Ties, a story DLC that'll be making its way to all its game consoles, so if you are playing that, go ahead. And then on November 11th, Friday, there will be Tactics Ogre Reborn. This is a Square Enix property. I think it's a remaster of an original game, but that comes to PC, PlayStation, and Switch. That has been the Stay Tuned on Gaming podcast. Welcome to the very third episode of it. If you like this video, comment, like, and subscribe. I gotta say this because that's how the algorithm apparently works.